Hi, I wanted to be able to give you an update of what's gone on in Washington this week. Out of our office, we continue to fight to be able to create jobs right here at home, to be able to address an unwieldy and out of control federal budget, and also to be dealing with what we hear so often as we travel throughout our district. Unwieldy regulations which are inhibiting our jobs from being created and businesses from being able to invest, to be able to help this American economy truly get moving. I'm pleased to be able to report to you that my Small Hydroelectric and Jobs Act of 2013 just passed the full House of Representatives this week with an astonishing number of votes, 417 for and only 7 against. We had a remarkable victory this week for good common sense legislation. What this bill actually does is just eliminate unnecessary and redundant regulations which were making small hydroelectric projects cost inefficient to be able to literally be able to perform. We had an example that came out of Arizona to be able to install one of these small hydroelectric units into a ditch that was constructed by the Bureau of Reclamation was going to cost $20,000. The regulatory requirements were going to cost $50,000, better than 2.5 times the actual cost of the project. Our bill is actually going to allow cost-effective construction to be able to generate affordable electricity. And if you're concerned, as I am, about our senior citizens who are living on fixed incomes and our young families that are struggling to be able to make ends meet, affordable energy becomes very important. This is a bill that can help achieve this. In fact, if we take full advantage of this piece of legislation, just out of the state of Colorado alone, through our canals, through our pipelines built by the Bureau of Reclamation, we'll be able to generate as much electricity as the Glen Canyon Dam. And that doesn't even include the rest of the western United States. So a good common sense piece of legislation which received overwhelming bipartisan support in its passage through the House of Representatives. I do think it is worthy of note that political games are always afoot in Washington. We had some of our Democrat colleagues that have put forward what's called a motion to recommit, which is often used by both parties for political advantage. What the bill was going to require is that all materials had to be American made. Well, that sounds good and something that we support, American jobs and American materials to be able to work with. But we've got a different view. Unlike some of my colleagues on the other side, I don't think that we need a law for Americans to be able to compete. We just need the opportunity to be able to compete. That's exactly what this piece of legislation does. Also pleased to be able to report that our Planning for America's Energy Future Act has been reintroduced for legislation as well, and we just went through the subcommittee hearing and will now be going before the full Natural Resources Committee on our Healthy Forest Management and Wildfire Act of 2013. The timing for this truly couldn't be more important. All of us who live in Colorado and love our public lands, love the sight of our mountains, understand the threat of fire danger that we're seeing, not only to our homes, but to the valiant firefighters and emergency service personnel that work in those areas. This is a piece of legislation to be able to re-engage our county commissioners, our governor, in identifying those areas of high risk around our watersheds, around our schools, the power lines which supply energy to our homes, to be able to address those areas from the massive bark beetle kill that we're seeing that's impacting so much of our state. This legislation has received broad bipartisan support from a variety of different interest groups. We did pass that out of the initial committee with bipartisan support, and we're hopeful that we're going to see that on the floor before long, where I believe that, again, we will pass it through the House of Representatives with members from both sides recognizing the importance of addressing the massive chance of wildfire that we see throughout the western U.S. The time for action is now. The status quo is simply not acceptable. As we move forward, we're also going to be looking at tax reform. Chairman Camp out of the Ways and Means Committee has introduced draft legislation at this point for discussion to be able to make the tax code flatter, fairer, and simpler. Right now, Americans are consuming multiple hours. In fact, even the easy short form requires better than 40 pages to be able to complete the tax code in this country. We know the government needs some revenues to be able to perform some of the essential services that government is required to do, but we can make this tax code flatter, fairer, and simpler. Let's look at those loopholes, but let's also make sure that we have a tax code that's going to make Americans competitive in the world marketplace and right here at home as well, with the ultimate goal of recognizing that the American people, your family, needs those resources in your pocket far more than Washington needs additional spending in Washington, D.C. This year, the federal government will take in $2.7 trillion, record revenues coming in. So Washington is not starving for income, but it does have a spending problem. We're continuing to work to be able to identify those areas of waste, fraud, abuse, redundancy which exist, to be able to bring responsible spending to Washington, and to be able to look out for the American taxpayer, the people who are actually footing the bill. We look forward to your comments coming into our office. Your voice is important to be able to have that reflected right here. Through your efforts, we've been able to stand up for Colorado's water and will continue to do so, from overreaches from the National Forest Service and the Department of Interior. And we'll be happy to update you on some of those actions in the later weeks as those committees develop and we get them assigned for an actual hearing. So thank you, and again, feel free to reach into our offices. We do want to hear your voice.